Morning everyone, hello, I'm Kelly, and another catchy thesis title for you, Study Investigating the Prevalence, Practice and Perspectives of the Use of Internal Exclusion in Mainstream Secondary Schools. So to start with a bit of context, I think there's perhaps a tacit understanding that internal exclusion, I'm going to call it IE, exists in most secondary schools in England, and to exemplify that, there's this image on the screen here. It's taken, I'm not sure you're the right demographic really, it's a programme from CBBC, it's called Class Dismissed, and this character Mark, I quote, is serving time in isolation. Anyway, when I saw this programme, I realised how much IE has been absorbed into our kind of cultural narrative in terms of, pushed it ahead too far, in terms of our cultural narrative about what the experience of secondary school is like. And I think what's interesting about IE is whilst it's thought to be a commonly used practice in secondary schools, it's actually relatively really poorly understood. So, for example, there aren't any official statistics saying how many schools use IE. We don't know how many pupils are affected by IE. We don't know how long they attend IE for, and we don't know what they do when they're there. I think what's particularly troubling, perhaps, is that there aren't any official statistics or any sort of analysis of the characteristics of pupils that attend IE. And given that there are these sort of troubling, really troubling inequalities in our formal exclusion data, it's not too much of a leap, is it, to imagine that similar inequalities are perhaps present in their informal exclusion data as well. There's also no kind of formal accountability mechanisms for schools using IE in the same way that there is with fixed term exclusion and permanent exclusion. And that leads to kind of a whole host of discretionary practice in schools. Right, so my study then really aimed to try and really sort of begin to bridge these gaps in the research literature. So the questions were threefold. The first was about prevalence. I wanted to get an idea of how many schools actually are using IE and how many pupils it affects. I wanted to get a sense of practice, you know, how is IE operationalized? I wanted to think about the role of the EP here as well, and how we can get involved. So here we are. There we are. Twitchy fingers. And third one was about perspectives. I wanted to make sure, I wanted to, you know, have a think about what EP ideas were about perspectives on IE and also for school staff as well. Right, now I'm ready. The methodology was underpinned by pragmatic epistemology. I've been practicing that. I went okay, didn't it? Yeah. Epistemology. I saw Lauren and John avoided it in their presentation. Yeah, I really wanted to think about what the research questions, what knowledge they could produce, be driven by the research questions, and think about the practical implications of the research. So the study was a sequential study. There were two stages. So the first was the quantitative phase. So that comprised two survey measures, one for EPs, one for school staff. And then the second was the qualitative phase, which was the interviews. And in the end, I ended up interviewing head teachers and senior leaders in secondary schools. Okay, let's shift along. I'm going to use this. There we are. So my findings then, surprise, surprise, IE was a highly prevalent strategy. And I think if we use the EP survey data as an example, results indicated that IE was used in 79% of schools. And if you see the second map there, I was a bit annoyed that John's map was a bit better than mine actually, but you see there's 9, oh, it's gone again. There are 9, there are 9 regions that it covers. So this is sort of a pervasive strategy across England. It's not localised in the southeast or London. And the participants from the staff survey is the map above, and as you can see, it sort of triangulates the data. You can see it's sort of used throughout the country. The indications of kind of prevalence in the staff survey were higher. That was 98%, but sort of reflecting on that, perhaps that data is a bit less valid because arguably the participants that were responding to the staff survey were more likely to if they used IE in their school settings. Okay, the number of pupils referred to IE was typically pretty small, 0 to 5 pupils per day. Given that an average secondary school is around 1,000, we're talking about a small percentage of pupils. However, in some cases, schools indicated the 16 to 20 plus range, so again, it can be more pervasive and there is high variability. Interestingly, I think the survey participants perceived that IE referral numbers were either stable or increasing. And I was really surprised by this because I'd imagine, you know, considering it's such a punitive measure, that if they would perceive it to be decreasing, or indeed if it was having an impact, that the incidence would be decreasing. So kind of raises and invites interesting questions about what the purpose of the strategy is and how schools are evaluating it. Okay, the second question in terms of practice. So again, highly variable. I mean, given that there's absolutely no government guidance in terms of how schools use IE, it's perhaps again unsurprising, but referral length tends to be 1 school full day. That was the most frequent response, but again, it can be more, and 8 schools indicated 3 or more days. Referral reasons tend to be persistent disruptive behaviour, but sort of lesser behaviour infringements like uniform irregularities, for example, can also comprise a reason for referral. So again, a range. Supervision was interesting. So you can have a member of SLT, or sometimes it's someone recruited particularly for that role. So in one case, that was a retired police officer, in fact, that did the IE supervision. Says it all. Thinking back to sort of what Kate was saying, actually, in her presentation, the most frequent response was teaching assistants. So again, you have a group of staff, perhaps with less training than some of the other staff members in the school, working with the most vulnerable populations in the IE group. And it invites questions about the level of training that they receive to do that role. In terms of the IE environment, it does tend to really reinforce this kind of punitive nature of IE. So considering that an IE referral tends to be a full day, most schools indicate that the children aren't allowed to talk in the room at all. They follow a different timetable from the rest of the school, so they have different break times and lunch times. So in some schools, this break and lunchtime is served kind of in the internal exclusion room itself. So one head teacher sort of was saying to me, they get no fresh air at all. And that idea of kind of social separation was a key element of its kind of punitive nature. That was seen to be the most punitive part of it, I think, that sort of social separation from the peers. In terms of the setting, these sort of draconian representations of IE capture the news headlines quite frequently. And yes, some schools do go the booth route, and you can see that's my image there. And indeed, that's how it was on Class Dismissed on the CBeebies programme. But actually, some of the head teachers had really strong views on this, and there were divergent findings. They felt that, and again, I quote one of the head teachers who said that he felt that it was dehumanising and was really against these kinds of environments. And again, thinking about what Kate was saying, and indeed, I've got time to explore this here, but did a bit of thinking around the impacts of COVID. And if you think about these young people's mental health and well-being and these kind of environments, I think it's particularly pertinent now to consider how these environments are impacting, positive developmental outcomes. They should be holistic and rehabilitative. Okay. The EP profession. The good news is that survey respondents suggested that and I've lost track now. Can I have an extra minute? Yes, 2/3 of respondents suggested that EPs can support with behaviour in schools. That's the good news. The slightly less good news is when I evaluated the survey data from the EPs was that we tend to work on an individual level with behaviour. So we can be really, really sidelined when it comes to those big systemic questions about behaviour policy, about the way that internal exclusion rooms are run. And it's important that we're more involved. Okay, right, whipping through. In terms of perspectives, there was a perspective that SEND pupils are more likely to attend IE, but also a perspective that was wrong as well. A range of reasons was given for that, but mostly that a lack of differentiation in the classroom. I think that was the biggest reason. And also teacher training as well, perhaps a lack of SEN-related pedagogy and training in how to differentiate for behaviour needs. The other finding perspectives or key finding was that there was a perception that IE acted as a big deterrent in schools. It's something that young people would want to avoid because it's so punitive, it's so horrible. Yet at the same time, IE was perceived to be like a kind of revolving door, same pupils getting referred for the same behaviours. And there were lots of interesting thoughts around this. Both schools and EPs were sharing that it's because of this punitive measure isn't really addressing any underlying needs. It's not addressing the problems. It's just holding children, shifting it for a bit. There was and another kind of reason implicated in this is this sort of coercive cycle where if a child is missing a full day's worth of learning, they try and get back into that lesson, reintegrate, well, they've missed the lesson before, that's likely to increase the likelihood of emotion regulation difficulties, not decrease it. So this is a cycle where they're more likely to be referred, more difficult to reintegrate, and then the problem escalates. Okay, so quickly, in my last minute, this is my framework for EP and school practice. So I went quick. So the first thing, you know, I've highlighted is a change in government guidance. I mean, it's ridiculous that I think currently it says that children are allowed to be removed from the classroom for a limited period. It's incredibly vague. That needs to change. This sort of first block here is all about the evaluation of IE. I think it's important that schools identify the purpose of IE and then what the desired outcomes are of it, and then measure against that clearly. And I think EPs have a big role to play here. You know, we are trained in research and in inquiry. We can support them in their kind of evaluation of the process. Also, the head teachers were really searching for viable alternatives, scalable alternatives. We can help them with knowledge exchange programs, bring the research into schools and work with them to think about viable alternatives to IE practice. Second recommendation was about SEND and IE. It's so important that young people with SEND aren't experiencing repeated IE referrals because of unmet need. And surely there is a better way of identifying unmet need than repeated IE referrals. You know, and again, at a systemic level, we can help schools with strategies for that. The IE environment I've touched on. You know, it's important that it's holistic and rehabilitative. The OECD have just launched some really good advice actually about how post-COVID or during COVID, it's important that schools take a holistic approach and focus on well-being. And the final thing is about ethos. I think it's really important that we communicate an understanding of behaviour, a psychological understanding of behaviour. It's a form of communication. And I think that can have a lot of power if there's a shared understanding about that across a school. And again, that's where we can get involved. One final thought as well was that because only typically 0 to 5 pupils are referred to IE per day, and there's one teacher, and that one head teacher shared that cost about £70,000 to £80,000 to run. So in a secondary school, you've got a 1 to 5 adult pupil ratio. Where else does that exist in a secondary school? It just doesn't. It's normally 1 to 28. So there's a lot that can be done within that context in terms of developing relationships and facilitating interventions.